Greetings and welcome to the Quest for Wisdom podcast, where we search for nuggets of wisdom from the lives of some truly amazing people. Today's guest is Jasmine Doust. As well as being a close friend of mine, Jasmine is a non-practising solicitor with a master's degree in public international law and human rights. She is a founding member of Samos Volunteers, a non-governmental organisation providing psychosocial support to refugees and asylum seekers in Greece. She also serves as an advisor to a UK-based refugee charity. Jasmine has spent a lot of time working with refugees in Samos, fighting for better living conditions and a quicker route towards asylum. Today we talk about the refugee crisis, humanitarian work, police brutality, Samos Volunteers and post-traumatic stress disorder. Jasmine is a passionate human with a drive to help make the world a better place. It was an eye-opening conversation and I hope you enjoy it. You can reach Jasmine through the details that are in the description here and also follow Samos Volunteers to see their amazing work. Welcome, Jasmine, to the 9th episode of the Quest for Wisdom podcast. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, good. Happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. So you are a human. You are also a human rights lawyer. You are also my friend. And you are also a volunteer at the Samos refugee camp. Which of these do you think is the most important role in your life at the moment, other than human?
Other than human, I think that's a hard question to answer because I think those positions all kind of go hand in hand in a way. I think being a lawyer is what takes up most of my time, but my heart is still very much in Samos with the group that I work with there.
Okay. And what made you become a human rights lawyer in the first place? Can you explain your path towards that?
Yeah, I feel like human rights lawyer sounds very fancy and it's not really what I wouldn't say I'm like a human rights lawyer per se, but I am more of an immigration lawyer that works on asylum claims with refugees, and inherently in that is a lot of human rights law. So I think that path in my life kind of came from working in the refugee camp in Greece. And yeah, then after a period of time doing that, a couple of years, I qualified as a solicitor in the UK and then went down the human rights lawyer route.
So your passion was sparked in Samos.
It was sparked in Samos. Yeah, I think when I finished law school, I had no idea what I was doing with my life, which I think a lot of people feel when you finish university. But when you've finished a law degree, I think a lot of people are more set on what they're doing. They want to be a lawyer, but I didn't.
Well, you'd kind of hope so if you spent 6 or 7 years studying, like your whole life studying.
Yeah, and then did a master's in law, and I'm still like, not sure what I want to do with my life. But yeah, I think at that point it was, kind of needed to make a decision. And then this sort of fell into my lap is a weird way to say it, but it kind of was. And then everything just flowed on from there.
Destiny fell into your lap.
Destiny did.
Well, that's a good way for it to go, I suppose. And for the people that are listening that don't know what Samos is, which I imagine is pretty much everyone, do you want to explain what that is before we start digging deeper into that?
Yeah, sure. So Samos is a small island very close to the Turkish coastline. It's a little island in the Aegean. A lot of people have heard of Lesbos, the island which used to have a really big refugee camp called Moria on it, and it was quite often in the news. But no one has ever really heard of Samos, so I'm constantly explaining what it is. But yeah, it's an island just off the coast of Turkey, and it also has a refugee camp. There are 5 islands near the Turkish coastline that have camps for people that are travelling across on small rubber dinghies and other boats from Turkey to seek asylum, generally. And Samos, yeah, it's a small Greek island. It's a beautiful island. And at the end of 2015, 2016, when the Syrian conflict was really, it really kicked off, there were a lot of people fleeing from Syria and into Turkey and then into Europe via either the land border in northern Turkey to get into Greece or via the sea. So the refugee camps on the 5 islands were housing people that were that had travelled across the sea from Turkey.
And so you said 2015, 2016. So what year did you go there and why?
Yeah, so I went when I finished my degree in the summer of 2016. And the reason I went there, my parents had been helping out with a small group called High Wycombe Helping Others in the Shire.
That's Buckinghamshire in England.
In England. And they were, basically volunteering, helping to collect donations that were going to be sent to places that needed aid. So mostly clothes and other, we call it like non-food items, but also hygiene items. And they sent an ambulance once, I think, to Syria, sort of basically loading containers and sending them off to places in need. So mostly Turkey, but also places in Greece, Syria, Lebanon, I think. So they were doing that quite regularly, going up to this warehouse, loading boxes, putting boxes on containers and sending them off with this group. And one of the other volunteers there had recently been out to Greece, to Samos specifically, to help with refugees that were arriving on the island. So just basically providing very basic support. So preparing food for people, giving them dry clothes, blankets, water, tea, etc. And my mum was quite inspired by that. And so in February 2016, I think it was, she went out to Samos for a week or two. And I think she spent basically the whole time making sandwiches for people in a tent with other volunteers. And then a couple of months later, my dad went to visit and help out. And I was quite inspired by what they were doing. And so when I finished my degree in the summer, my dad had gone out again and he kind of persuaded me to join him. So I went out for, I think it was 10 days. And I kind of snuck in with the group because the minimum requirement was 2 weeks at the time. So I, flouted that rule. But stayed for, 10 days. And then the group was needing someone to be there a bit longer term to help manage the volunteers coming in and out. And as I said, I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. So I was like, I'm just going to stay. And then, ended up staying the first time for a year volunteering.
So at that time you were only 22?
Yeah.
So was that a bit nerve-wracking going all the way over there, like did you know what you're getting yourself in for?
I think because I'd been in the summer, I knew what I was going to go for. But then when I took on this role with quite some responsibility, it was a different experience and it was really challenging. Yeah, I was 22. I turned 23 in November 2016. So, I basically took over the recruitment for this organisation. And back then, the turnover of volunteers was huge. People were staying mostly for 2 weeks at a time, and we had a team of maybe 10 to 15 people back then. So there were a lot of people coming in and out. And the purpose of the volunteer coordinator was to make sure that people were trained properly, knew how all of the systems work, understood the situation of the camp, provided them with some information about the legal situation of people. So it was quite a lot. And it was also at a time where I was working full-time as a volunteer too. So back then we were distributing clothes, shoes, hygiene items to people who had just arrived. Often they arrive with nothing, having made the journey from Turkey, well, probably much further afield, but generally people arrive with very little belongings. And also we were doing kind of like an emergency response service as well. So when people arrived on the island from Turkey, it would normally be in the night or in the early hours of the morning. And quite often people would arrive like wet and cold and with basically nothing, and quite often dirty, and they wouldn't have anything for the children. So we would go, because sometimes they will have spent a couple of days before leaving Turkey, hiding in the forest or whatever, not having eaten, etc. So they arrived in pretty poor conditions. Mm-hmm. So we would get a call from usually the police of the camp, and then we would go up in the middle of the night and provide aid to people when they arrived. And I remember back in the winter of 2016, there were a lot of arrivals. People were coming more or less every night. So it was, very tiring, working throughout the day, but also getting up in the night, driving up to the warehouse to get all the stuff that we needed, and then driving to the camp, doing a distribution, going back to bed for a couple of hours, not really being able to sleep, and then getting up and doing a full day's work. That was quite tiring.
Yeah, that sounds pretty intense. And so the people that are arriving, like you mentioned, obviously they're having to hide in the woods. What is the Greek or Samosian, is that what they're called? Like, what is their stance on these people arriving? Like, obviously they're going to be arriving and they know that. Are they like hostile towards them? Do they let them come in? Do they kind of just leave them to do it or whatever? Like, how does it end up that Samos became a refugee island?
I think to answer that last question, just the location of it. It's so close to Turkey. I think the closest point is something like 1.5 kilometers by sea. And you could be sitting on a beach in Samos, and the Turkish coastline is so close, you can see the buildings. But at the beginning, for quite a long time, the local population was very happy to be involved in helping out, and people were really friendly and receptive, and helped provide food, and people would donate clothes, etc. I think as time went on and people became more aware of the conditions of the refugee camp in Samos, the old one, they were really, really dire. Really disgusting. People were staying in, basically a large portion of people were staying in really flimsy pop-up summer festival tents, even throughout the winter. There was quite often water shortages. There was nowhere to, very limited, if any, hot water, so very difficult to wash your clothes and your blankets, sleeping bags, etc. So and with so many people living in such packed, close quarters, people would get very sick. There'd be diseases, scabies going around. There was a big problem with rats and snakes in the camp. And
poisonous snakes?
I don't know if they're poisonous, but I'd heard of them biting people.
Oh, so like more of like a pest.
Yeah.
I mean, no one really wants snakes slithering around their camp, do they?
No, not really at all. But the rats were huge, like the size of cats, because there's just so much rubbish and litter everywhere. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is the conditions of the camp were so dire, and I think people could see that it was just such an awful situation that they were... The feeling kind of changed. People weren't necessarily angry because people were coming and arriving on the island, but they were just so fed up with having this big problem that was so close to the town, and the government and the authorities were not doing anything about it, and they were just letting it go on and on. and people were really suffering there. So I think as time went on, kind of sympathy for the situation started to drop off and people got frustrated. And then I think some people blamed the decreasing amount of tourism on the island, on the refugee crisis, which...
Probably accurate.
I didn't agree with that.
Really? What, did the tourists carried on coming anyway?
Most of the tourists that I ever met had no idea that there was a camp there before they came. No. I know people that have been...
That must have been like quite a shock then for people arriving, and I suppose you wouldn't really know, would you? Like if you just booked a holiday, you wouldn't really know.
No, not at all. And I know people that went on holiday, you know, I'll talk to people about Greece that I meet and they'll say, oh, I went to Lesbos. And I say, oh, did you hear about the camp there? Like the camp in Lesbos, maybe at least amongst the, you know, the humanitarian community, the Moria camp was very, very famous. And most tourists haven't even heard of that. So I don't think it particularly influenced tourism in the way...
I suppose they're not really advertising it in the airport, are they?
No.
Advertising tours.
No. And it's still a really beautiful island to visit, and you can be there and not know anything about the situation and the refugee crisis. Now it is different because they do have a new camp that they built in the middle of nowhere, basically in the middle of the island, completely far away from any towns and villages. That's a whole another story. It kind of looks more like a big prison
concentration camp.
Essentially. I don't know if I've shown you the photos before, but yeah, basically it's I mean, the conditions are better in that people aren't living in tents anymore. They're living in these what do you call them, like kind of caravan type boxes,
like shipping containers.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah,
because I think that I heard before about the shipping container thing that if I'm not wrong, I think that there was some sort of plan to do it here in Barcelona, and just build these shipping containers, because obviously it's like relatively low cost, and you can like there's an okay amount of space in it for a certain number of people.
Yeah.
But then obviously you come to the problem of, well, when it's summer, you're in a big metal box.
Yeah.
Which is like swelteringly hot. And I remember just looking at, can't remember where I saw the pictures of it, but just looking at one and being like, oh my God, that in summer would be disgustingly hot. Like a normal flat in summer is disgustingly hot.
Yeah.
Like, so that, I don't know, that must be, and I suppose in winter it'd be absolutely freezing as well.
Yeah. I think some of these boxes have air conditioning units in them, but yeah, I can imagine that they break quite easily, and it might not be very effective. I don't know. I haven't been inside one since the new camp's been built, because we're not allowed in. But
why?
Because you have to, if you want to work inside the new camp facility, which it's not actually called a camp anymore, it's called a Closed Controlled Access Centre, CCAC.
Okay.
Yes, really got a good ring to it.
Yeah. Rolls off the tongue.
If you want to enter the CCAC, you have to be registered with the Ministry of Migration. And there's this whole big bureaucratic nonsense that they brought in a couple of years ago, basically to tell the NGOs that they had to register in order to continue working with asylum seekers and refugees. But they made the requirements ridiculous in the sense that they were just impossible for smaller grassroots groups to meet. So we couldn't meet them. So we don't have permission to work inside the camp. But in any case, we wouldn't work inside the camp from more of like a political stance, because we don't agree with it being there. So we provide our services outside of the camp. So we have a plot of land a few minutes walk from the new CCAC that people can come to basically receive psychosocial support. So we have it's basically like a community land. So we have
So you purchase that land and then you kind of installed your services on it, or you rent the land, or what?
Yeah, we rent the land, and so we built some structures so that we can carry on providing our language classes, recreational activities, sports stuff, women's safe space, and people can get outside of the camp and come to a space that they feel welcome, and it being like just a nicer place to come rather than just sitting in the camp all day.
And so why do you not agree with the camp? Like what is the issues?
I think partly it's building this big prison-like camp in the middle of nowhere is sort of basically putting people out of sight, out of mind, and it's just another way of like palming off the problem. I think it's not particularly dealing with it. I think if you'd see, maybe I need to show you some pictures of the place, but it's really not a very nice way to receive asylum seekers who are fleeing from war and persecution. There's also a curfew, I think, is still in place. So that kind of gives off prison vibes. And there is not very much medical support. In fact, I think at the moment there may be one doctor for, I think maybe 1,200 people.
Wow.
And then sometimes there's just no medical support at all. There's nowhere to go. You know, I think to walk to the nearest village is maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. And when you're there for months on end, waiting for your asylum case to be considered, it's just really, like, could you do that?
I have no idea. I can't even put myself in that situation.
Yeah.
It would be...
I would go insane. And there is no mental health support provided by the state.
So is the government, like, what is the relationship like on the whole between the government and the NGOs? So NGOs are non-government organizations, so basically like charities, right? More or less.
Non-profit,
Non-profit organizations. So are there ones that they kind of, the big organizations that they have a good relationship with and they don't really care about anyone else, or how does it work?
Yeah, some of the bigger organizations.
Who are they?
So the UN,
Mm-hmm.
the United Nations Refugee Agency, works inside the camp still. Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, they provide a mobile clinic, or they were providing a mobile clinic inside the CCAC. And then there were a couple of other larger organisations working inside too, but then I'm not sure exactly, but there's been some new rule to do with the registration of NGO staff or volunteers, and they've now lost their permission to work inside.
Right.
As well. Generally, our relationship with the government has been a bit rocky over the last few years, but it's fine. We kind of just do our thing. Go about
doing your business and leave them alone.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine that from a government position, it would be very complex trying to maintain good relationships with loads of different organizations, especially like you're mentioning that you don't have the same you don't have the same kind of vision as they do, and I suppose every different organization will have their own ideas of what's right and what's wrong, and trying to juggle all of that must be really complicated for everyone involved. So it's like excuse me, like I'm trying to think of, because I'm thinking of this refugee camp in the middle of nowhere, and like I'm trying to imagine how that could not be like that, but then it would also be very complicated, and I'm not sure how it would work to kind of put that not in the middle of nowhere and just kind of integrate people into the society straight away. Like it would, I don't know if that would cause more problems for everyone overall or less. I don't know. It's really hard to know, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a simple answer to it because it is such a complex situation, and I certainly don't have the answers. No,
Oh, what? What have I invited you for then?
But I do think, there are a lot of vulnerable people that are currently in that place that should just not be there. And there are so many, for example, there's so many empty buildings, empty hotels and stuff on Samos Island. Like they used to house vulnerable people in accommodation, like in the town, for example. You can do more of that. You can speed up the asylum process, let people, they're restricted. There's a restriction on their ability to move off the island generally until their case is processed. So you could remove that restriction and allow people to go to the mainland, reunite with other family members there. There's a lot more support.
Mainland Greece.
Mainland Greece. There's a lot more support for people, medical support, psychosocial support, more NGOs providing services on the mainland. So having this geographical restriction in place is a big issue.
Okay, and can you explain asylum? Like when these people go to, when they're leaving Turkey, let's say they're coming from Syria. What's their goal with asylum? Like what are they trying to achieve here?
Yeah, so
how do they start? So like when they start their journey, typically what will happen from Syria, from like start to finish? Like in the ideal case, what will happen from start to finish?
So the reason that people apply for refugee status is because they're generally fleeing from their country of origin or their country of residence because of a threat of serious harm to them or persecution because of, for example, their political opinion or their race, their nationality, their gender.
Could you be
religion.
a refugee for more personal reasons? Could you be a refugee from domestic violence or something, for example?
So you are a refugee because of personal reasons, yes. So refugee status is kind of different to... There's another form of protection called humanitarian protection or subsidiary protection, it's called. And when there's like a general risk of harm, for example, because your country is in war, civil war, you're less likely to be granted refugee status because refugee status is based on your personal risk of persecution.
Okay.
So, for example, if you were from Syria and you were doing a load of political activism that was against the government, you were going to protests, you might have been put in jail for a while, you might have been tortured, you are at risk of serious harm because of the activities that you've been doing, and that would be a potential claim for refugee status.
So refugee status is kind of like the most extreme cases.
Yeah, if you want to put it like that, yeah. Whereas another case might be you're living in Syria and the conflict is ongoing and your town, it's unsafe, there's bombing, there's a lot of violence going on, and you and your family flee. You might instead be granted humanitarian protection or subsidiary protection because you're not being persecuted specifically because of an innate characteristic that you have.
It's more generic.
It's more generic, yeah.
But do both of those hold equal weight when applying for status? Or is it the people who are applying for refugee are more likely to quickly get their response, or how does that work?
It kind of it really depends on the nationality and it kind of depends on a lot of things. Also, what country you're applying in. The asylum backlog in the UK, for example, is huge. There's so many people waiting on decisions. Some cases take 2 to 3 years. Some are processed much more quickly. When I was working in private practice, so, representing Syrian asylum seekers, the cases were kind of more straightforward in a way because it was to do with, the civil war that was going on. So their cases were processed more quickly. But then when you have cases where a lot of research needs to be done, a lot of fact checking, very unusual circumstances, which a lot of the time there can be, then
What would be an example of an unusual circumstance?
I think political cases can be quite tricky because I'm trying to think of an example, but when you're trying to, for example, prove that you were part of a political movement and that you're an activist in your home country, that you attended protest, what are there photographs of you holding banners at this protest? Like, how do you go about proving that? Like, that's difficult for the applicant to prove.
And what is the burden of proof in the court for this?
It's basically like in the UK, it's a reasonable degree of likelihood that you are, you've been suffering from persecution or serious harm in your country of origin.
So you have to prove with a reasonable level of certainty.
Yeah. It's more likely than not, I think, is in layman's terms.
So balance of probability?
No, that's different.
That's civil law.
Are you bringing this up from the A-level law course that we did at Henley?
No, I'm just wondering because, like, if it's like how high you have to prove, like the burden of proof, like.
It's for refugee cases. It's quite a low standard.
Okay.
Yeah. So
just basically whether it seems believable or not.
Essentially, balance of probabilities is more of like a more than 50% thing, so maybe 51% chance. It's lower for refugee cases.
Okay. And so then once these people are applying for their status, and like why do they want this refugee status?
Someone would want refugee status in a situation where they feel that they can't go back to their home country because of the situations that they've fled from. And by having some kind of protection status in another country, a third country, they can stay for a period of time. They will usually be granted a right to work, a right to access social welfare, healthcare. They might be able to put their children in school, or they should be able to put their children in school, and they can stay in a place for at least the time being. It's a safer place than the place that they fled from.
Okay, so basically it gives them the right to become a temporary or potentially full-on citizen of that place and start a new life, basically, where they're hopefully not going to be persecuted or killed.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's pretty desirable for these people then to get that. And so why does the process take so long? And how, if in Greece, how does the government feel towards this? Like, what are the pros and cons of allowing people to have refugee status?
I think it's hard to kind of put pros and cons on it. I mean, states that are members of, there is an international legal obligation to provide protection to people that need it, right? So you have the Refugee Convention that essentially gives people the right to claim asylum, and states that are party to the Refugee Convention, which is a lot of states, including Greece and the UK, they have an obligation to allow refugees or allow asylum seekers to apply for refugee status there. I think, it's hard to kind of put pros and cons. Yeah. Not sure how to answer that really.
Okay, so they're legally obliged to offer these people refugee status in theory, but in practice why is the process so complicated if they're legally obligated to do it? Why is there such delays? Why is it so complicated?
Yeah, I mean, the process is complicated because everything is so fact specific when you're applying for refugee status. There's not a certain number of requirements that you need to meet per se. It's not a box ticking exercise where if you tick these boxes, then yep, you're granted refugee status. Everything's very fact specific. It's based on the evidence that the person can provide. It's based on the interview that the person will give and whether the decision maker concludes that that person is credible in what they say. And so when you have all of this to consider, the evidence gathering process takes a long time, then arranging interviews, carrying out the interviews, and then the decision making process is really long. And when you have thousands of people to deal with, I mean, you know, one solution would just be to recruit more trained caseworkers to deal with the backlog. I guess I'm talking more about the UK now, which the sort of legal process for asylum in the UK I'm obviously more familiar with, because I wasn't representing anyone in Greece in the asylum process. But yeah, more caseworkers, better trained caseworkers is important.
And when you say caseworkers, what is a caseworker a lawyer, or are they someone who's like below a lawyer?
They're not lawyers generally.
They're not lawyers.
No.
They're like they're almost like social workers.
Not even. Like I don't know what the CVs are for a Home Office caseworker in the UK, but I don't want to.
Okay, so
don't want to be mean about caseworkers, but I've seen some questionable decisions in the past.
So it's just a kind of government bureaucratic job basically, and there's no specific like legal qualifications or anything to.
No, I think you get some limited training on how to be a decision maker and make decisions. But I think the figures on how many cases end up at appeal speak for themselves. I think it's something around 50 or sort of in the 40% of cases will end up being successful on appeal.
Okay.
So it's quite a portion. I hope that is the right figure, but it is quite a large portion of cases are incorrectly decided at first instance and succeed on appeal. But then when you've got all of these cases that then need to go through the tribunal to appeal, that creates more delay. And so people end up waiting years for their case to be determined.
So a caseworker, in effect, they'll prepare the documents, they'll prepare the evidence. Is that correct? And then they pass that to a lawyer?
No. The caseworker receives the evidence. And
from the lawyer?
If the applicant has a lawyer, quite often, particularly with the state of legal aid in the UK, asylum seekers can't get access to legal representation, and will either represent themselves or will get help from family or friends, someone in their local community. But if they do have a lawyer, then the lawyer will help prepare the case. They apply for, basically they tell the Home Office in the UK that they want to apply for asylum, and then their case is opened, and then the lawyer or the applicant themselves will gather the evidence. They might submit a witness statement, send that to the Home Office. A caseworker at some point will pick that up, and then eventually an interview will be carried out, and they'll be asked questions about any evidence that they provided, but the background for their case, what their journey was to the UK, why they're applying for asylum, what was it that made them leave their country of origin, and led them to needing to apply for protection in the UK.
Wow. And so you mentioned in your previous job you were representing refugees. That was your role, to help them in that process. So, and you mentioned that not everyone's getting legal aid, and obviously it costs money to hire a solicitor.
Yeah.
So were the people that you were representing, were they generally wealthy people, or were they people who'd managed to get legal aid?
So we didn't have a legal aid contract at my firm.
Okay.
So they were people that were paying. Yeah.
So they must be relatively wealthy then to be able to afford that.
Yeah.
So they're kind of the lucky ones, I suppose.
The lucky ones, yeah. Which was a bit conflicting for me. We did pro bono work where we could, but it's difficult for people.
Yeah, because obviously the company still has to make money. And yeah, because I remember you telling me before that it was sort of a bit of a moral conflict for you, because you're like, well, we have to charge money, like probably quite a lot of money, to these people to then represent them, to help them try and escape war and persecution.
Yeah, I think it was just after years of volunteering and working, for people for free, it was just a bit of a strange transition for me.
And so when the people are represented by like yourselves or whoever it is the chances of them succeeding way higher and quicker?
Quicker, not necessarily. Although potentially, because if you have a lawyer that gets all of the evidence, adheres to deadlines, timelines, knows the process, then I guess things could be faster. So yeah, probably. And your chances are better with a lawyer because the lawyer will be able to advise on what sort of evidence that you need to provide in order to demonstrate that you are at risk of persecution in your country of origin. And they can also attend the interview with you. They can help prepare statements. They can write legal representations to set out why the applicant falls within the definition of a refugee. And so generally I think people have a better chance when they are legally represented, but that would be the same in any area of law. Generally, if you have a specialist working with you, advising you, representing you, you have a better chance of doing things correctly. You know, that's why we have lawyers, because they are able to navigate the law and understand it.
And it's not generally recommended to represent yourself, is it? If it can be avoided.
If it can be avoided, I guess. It depends on the circumstances. I think you've come to me before with some very random legal questions. It's like well out of my area of expertise, and I would have as much knowledge on the subject as you did. Like, I don't know, some company law stuff. And I think, I don't know, ask a lawyer.
Yeah, I suppose you just expect. It's like, what have you been studying for if you can't answer my law question?
Yeah.
So what are the next steps for Samos? When are you going back? What's Samos working on at the moment? Samos Volunteers, sorry. Samos Volunteers is the name of the organisation.
Yeah. I'm going to go back, I think, in probably April, I think, for a little while. Samos Volunteers is, still providing psychosocial support through our community safe spaces. And doing as much as we can in the small way. That we can next to the camp.
And how many volunteers have you got at the moment?
Good question. It does change quite a lot. So we have community volunteers as well, which are people from the community that live inside the CCAC. So lots of different nationalities, and it's really great to have a population of community volunteers as well to advise on, basically to tell us, what the needs of the people are that we're serving, and to help with translation, interpretation, and just have a better connection with the community that we're supporting. So with community volunteers and the rest of the team can be, I'd say, up to 20 or something. Okay. It really does change. And
what about like the solid, like the hardcore members like you?
So we have a field coordination team who also do change roughly every 6 to 12 months. People tend to, I would say, the average coordinator time spent is. And there's, I think, 5 or 6. So there's a project manager, and then there's maybe 4 main field coordinators, or 5. And then there's a board, sort of like the trustees of the organisation, that advise on the long-term strategy, and so then that's made up of 4 of us.
Okay. Okay, so you've got a little core going on, and then you've got the people that come in every so often to help out.
Yeah, so the four of us have been with SV basically from the start. Two came a little bit later, but me and one of the others registered the organisation as a non-profit association, originally in Spain actually, and then in Greece back in 2016 and 17. And we meet roughly once every 4 or 6 weeks with the team on the ground.
No, nice. And you mentioned to me before that like which are the countries where most of the people come from, the main countries?
Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran, and then there's some countries in Africa as well, Eritrea, Sudan, Ethiopia, DRC, Congo. Various countries.
Okay, so even because I was thinking at first that it was going to be mainly Arabic, but that like Arabic speaking countries, but then you do still have a fair few different languages thrown in there.
Yeah.
So that like how, and also you mentioned to me before that when we spoke a few years ago that there'd been like battles going on between different, because there's different branches of religion within that, aren't there? And there are different countries that don't necessarily like each other, and different groups of people that don't like each other, all crammed into small environments. And wasn't there fires and things before?
Yeah, I think that was the main problem, living in such close,
It's like
quarters,
in prison, I suppose.
basically, but really, in really horrible conditions.
I suppose it's worse than prison, isn't it? Really?
Kind of. Like, at least in a prison, you have a roof over your head.
And a bed.
Yeah. And there would be conflicts and fights breaking out just because, I mean, it's quite understandable, really. You know, there'd be fights over access to phone chargers, for example, just because really small things would set people off when you have nothing to do with your day and you're so frustrated by the system. You've been living in a really shitty place in a tent for months, sometimes years. There would be conflicts sometimes between different nationalities, different ethnicity groups, etc. And then, one time, well, there were a few fires, but the big one where a large portion of the camp burnt down, it was November 2019, I think. And that was quite scary. And
Were you there then?
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. It started with a fight, which kind of turned into a riot. And then I think people were throwing like Molotov cocktails.
Jesus.
And when you're living in such close conditions and there's tents cramped in between trees, the fire spreads really rapidly and everything's just super flammable. So much burnt down. And it was back at the time when there were several thousand people living in the camp, and it was quite late at night. We just could see the flames coming from our apartment. And so we went down, and basically just like the whole town was just like lit up orange with so much smoke, and everyone was fleeing from the camp. And some people from the municipality came and asked me, can we house people for a few days or like shelter people because they have nowhere to go now. And so we basically within a couple of hours turned our community centre into like a hotel accommodation, which was stressful. But we housed a few hundred people over a few days in there because there was nowhere else for them to go. And it was November, so it was getting quite cold. The weather was bad. So we prioritised the women with children and stuff. And most of the dads were very good about it. They would drop off the women and children and be like, we understand why we can't come in as well because there's not enough space. And then they would just sleep outside, which was heartbreaking to see. But yeah, that was another few days of no sleep for most of the volunteers and for people as well.
Because I remember we spoke around that time and you wrote me like a little, because I bought you a little diary thing and then I forgot that you're vegan and I got like a leather diary and then I was like, gave it to you and you thought I was joking. And I was like, oh shit, I didn't think this through. And then you wrote me like a little message in the front of it and it was saying something about being like majorly stressed and like exhausted and everything because all this horrible stuff was going on around and you're getting no sleep and you're just up all the time. It sounded rough.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it was, I think I've always found talking about how I was feeling really, really difficult, and I still do now, it's not really got much better. But I think one of the things, if I could do it all again, was to take much better care of my physical and mental health when I was there, because I suffered from burnout several times. And when you're not your most healthiest self, it takes its toll, I think. And I really struggled. I'd come back for a visit to the UK and people would ask, oh, how's it going? And like, I think I always just felt like, okay, because it's not me living in the camp, living in these shit conditions, I have nothing to complain about. So I would always just be like, yeah, things are fine, things are great. But in my head, I was like really, really struggling. And I think when I wrote that letter to you in this diary, it was like kind of just all came out like some word vomit about how I was feeling. And
I think it's like, especially in those, I spoke about this recently with someone that on like a way smaller scale here, like, like yesterday we're walking around and there's loads of homeless people, loads of deformed people, loads of people who are like, mentally ill walking around the street and, like open wounds all over them and drug addicts and everything everywhere.
Yeah.
And like, then sometimes it like when you see people like that who are really physically suffering and like living on the street and everything, and then you've got some little problem that you're bitching about to yourself. It's like, oh, I don't feel very good today or whatever. And then you kind of like constantly telling yourself, oh, shut up, like get over it. Like you've got nothing compared to these people.
Yeah.
And it's like, whilst that is true, like logically true, it's not, you can't compare. It's like they're two totally separate things. And it's like, there's something that I always try and keep in my head. And there's a guy that I went to school with, and we wrote, like, I hadn't seen him since school, and we wrote a couple of letters to each other, like when I was doing my letter writing thing, and he said to me, like, Connor, he said, like, when you're in an aeroplane and they give you the safety talk, they tell people, tell the adults, put your oxygen mask on before your child.
Yeah.
And that's because if you're not protecting yourself and you're not like, providing yourself with oxygen, that can be anything, providing yourself with physical support, providing yourself with emotional support, providing yourself with mental health support. It's like, if you're not treating yourself right and taking care of yourself, then you're not able to take care. And eventually, if you don't, in that case with the oxygen, it's an extreme one, but it's like, if you don't put oxygen on yourself and you run out of oxygen, you're going to die and your kid's going to die anyway.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's like, it's very hard, I think, to find that balance of, okay, I need to look after myself, but I also need to look after all the other people, because it is often easier to look after other people than it is. Well, it is easier to look after other people than looking after yourself. Is like the hardest thing for some weird reason.
Yeah. Even with the other volunteers, I was preaching this. I was saying, make sure you get like good not work-life balance, because it is different when you're volunteering in these sort of humanitarian settings, and there's not much of like a work-life balance to have. But making sure that you do take care of yourself, you get enough sleep, you take your days off. But I wasn't doing any of that myself, and so probably wasn't setting a very good example. And I think I kind of left things until they were too late before. I think if I could go back and do things again, I would have taken better care of myself. And starting to suffer from panic attacks was an example of that. Never had a panic attack before in my life, and then suddenly I was having them, and it's terrible and it feels like you're dying. And I didn't really understand why I was having them at first. And then, and then something clicked and I was like, oh yeah, because I'm in a
really stressful
really
situation,
stressful
not
situation.
sleeping properly and absorbing everybody else's problems.
Yeah.
And that's a recipe for disaster, I think. But so when you started getting the panic attacks and it clicked, then what steps did you take to kind of try and unwind that?
Yeah, I think one thing I am quite good at is when there is a problem, I'll try and fix it. I'm a bit of a fixer. So once I acknowledged, okay, I'm having panic attacks, there's clearly something going on, then I reached out to a psychologist and she was really good and we just had some online meetings about how to deal with panic attacks. So I dealt with that problem.
How do you deal with a panic attack?
It was years ago now. I can't really remember the proper techniques, and luckily I haven't had any since. But it's just about bringing, or at least for me, it was about bringing myself back to the present and concentrating on what's around me, what I could smell, naming the different colours that I could see, and just focusing on regulating breathing and stuff again. But it was, for me, it was like, okay, I have this problem. I'm starting to suffer with panic attacks. I need to deal with this. Had the sessions to deal with the panic attacks and then stopped and didn't actually go back and investigate the root cause of why they'd started in the first place. So I think, again, if I could have gone back, I would have maybe spent some more time with a therapist dealing with those things that I'd seen.
Yeah, because it's kind of like therapists have therapy because they're dealing with other people's problems, and it's like logically, if you're kind of in a position where you're trying to take care of other people who are in a really vulnerable situation, like logically, you would need therapy, and it's like you need somewhere to offload that, I suppose, because otherwise it's like you are literally just taking upon all this burden upon your shoulders.
Yeah, and I think back then as well, I was maybe a bit stubborn and like not necessarily agreeing that.
I can believe that.
Yeah, you're smiling at me like, Jasmine, stubborn. I kind of told her about some of the things that I'd seen, been witness to. There were a couple of suicide attempts in the camp, and which I was sort of, they were really hard, and to sort of be there for. And this psychologist basically said that I was suffering from PTSD, and I was like, I'm not suffering from PTSD because people that I'm working with have PTSD. Why would I have it? But now, years later, looking back on it, you can suffer from, I think it's called vicarious trauma. Is that it? Like secondary trauma. But back then, I'd kind of been diagnosed with PTSD by a psychologist, but was dismissing it and just being like, no, I just need to deal with these panic attacks and then I need to get back to work, kind of thing. Which, meant that I think a lot of stuff in my early to mid 20s kind of got suppressed and not dealt with very well. But
I think that is a nice I think that's a big part of the 20s, is like,
oh my God, yeah.
It's just like letting stuff pile up until you start having panic attacks or something really terrible starts happening. You're like, right, I think maybe when people were telling me to look after myself, maybe I should have just listened. But I think it's that classic, like telling everybody else, like, I think that you should be meditating and not doing it yourself or something. I think you should be sleeping better and not doing it yourself. And it's like, I think that's just quite I suppose it's just as you're younger, you do those things, and eventually you start realizing that you're not indestructible.
Yeah.
And I think that having panic attacks, that does really bring you back down, because it's like, it makes you feel like you're dying. And so then you're like, oh God, maybe I'm not indestructible.
Yeah. Yeah, it brought me down a bit, maybe temporarily.
knocked me off my pedestal of invincibility for a little bit. But yeah, it's a very, very intense situation. Did you ever feel under threat by anyone, or did you ever have any kind of confrontations? Because I can imagine that, like, obviously being a female makes you more vulnerable to like attacks, and when there's a lot of people who are there in the same place and temperatures are rising, you know, did you ever feel under threat, I suppose?
Yeah. Though, yeah. I mean, when we were doing distributions from inside the camp, it was always very, very tense environment. And
is it like a first come first serve, or is there enough to go around?
Yes.
Do you calculate it?
Yeah, so we always did it on the basis that we would make sure that there was always enough for everyone.
Okay.
Because if you have enough for 50% of people, 50% of the other 50% are going to be like really annoyed and feel hard done by, which you obviously would do. Especially, you know, when you're giving out, for example, like winter coats in winter when everyone's freezing, like you need to have enough for everyone. Or you know, winter shoes, boots and stuff. So we would always make sure that there would be enough for a category of people. So enough for adult men, enough for adult women, enough for the different children's age groups. And so we used to do it in with a ticketing system. So we would go around giving everyone a ticket. And yeah, there were a couple of incidences that I did feel unsafe when tensions were high and people would argue and yeah.
But were they ever kind of threats towards you, or was it more that you were just kind of around a violent situation?
There were two violent situations that, yeah, it's difficult to talk about. But yeah, I was assaulted once, and I don't want to go into it. And it was dealt with. It wasn't handled very well by the police. I didn't feel like. So the kind of distrust in the police protection. Yeah.
So you contacted the police, or the police were already there?
Yeah, we contacted the police. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't much that they could do, but the way that they treated me, I think, was, yeah, I think, I don't want to say, it's kind of a bit of like misogynistic.
Right, okay.
Kind of, yeah.
So just like you kind of brought this upon yourself type of thing?
No, more just like, what happened was, something happened and then I left it a couple of days because I was like, okay, I'm just going to ignore that this thing happened. And then this guy was then following me around and who had assaulted me. He was then following me around for a couple of days. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, I can't just let this slide. I need to tell the police. I need to get this reported. And then I got a big telling off by the police for reporting this 2 days later, instead of going to them immediately. And yeah, basically just like shouted at for 20 minutes or whatever it was. Which, when you're coming to report a crime that's really, yeah, affected you in a bad way, yeah, you don't want to be just told off for holding off reporting it.
Yeah, and so, yeah, that sounds difficult. And so when all these like communications, like, do the Greek police speak English, or are you going through translators with all the different things you're doing?
They mostly speak English, yeah.
Okay. So overall, like the Greek level of English is pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, nice. And so where do you see yourself in 5 years? The classic job interview question. Because you left your role as as a solicitor, and you've moved into, what is it exactly?
So now I'm a freelance writer and editor. I write about immigration, human rights, asylum law in the UK.
Okay. And what do you think will be your next steps? Do you think, is this a gateway into something, or?
Do you know what? I don't know. I'm at this, like, the last 6 months of my life, since I've been doing this freelance job, working remotely, moving around to different countries. It's been great. I'm having the best time. And I feel like it's this end period of my 20s that I'm finally like learning a lot about myself, and there's been a lot of growth in the last 6 months. So I'm having a great time, very happy. So at the moment, I'm trying to not plan too far ahead for things, sort of living this nomadic life at the moment. It's a digital nomad life, and I love it. And I think, yeah, I don't want to plan too much. I don't know really what I want to do. I'm very happy with what I'm doing at the moment. So I want to keep that up for as long as possible, I think.
I suppose you've got like, well, from what you've told me, you've got a sense of freedom, I suppose, now that you maybe didn't have for quite a while.
Yeah.
You're not so tied into anything.
Exactly. I'm basically tied into nothing apart from my job, and I love my job. So I'm trying to make the most of that at the moment, and I have more free time, so I'm traveling around, I'm seeing friends, from volunteering. I have friends all over the world now, so it's really nice to spend more time with them. Coming to Barcelona to see you.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, that's always nice. Yeah, so I don't know what I want to be doing in 5 years' time. Probably, like, realistically, something in the humanitarian world still, whether it's immigration law or working with asylum seekers again.
Because
yeah,
we spoke before, like probably about a year ago or something, or I don't know when it was. We spoke before anyway about, because you were thinking of starting an NGO.
A second one.
A second one.
Yeah, I don't know. That idea is kind of put to the back of my...
You're like an NGO entrepreneur.
Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of on the back burner at the moment. I think I am just concentrating on my own things for now, which I haven't really done for
Ever.
For a while, ever. Yeah, which is nice. So let's see where that goes.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I suppose the future is exciting.
I don't remember having this conversation a year ago, did I?
Maybe a year ago. I think we went for a walk and we mentioned that.
Yeah.
And then before that, we were in the Harvester, me, you, and Laurie, and talking about NGOs.
That was years ago.
That was years ago. But my concept of years is extremely blurred.
What's that, Connor?
I don't know. But I don't know. Yeah, my concept of... I know it's very difficult, I think, to know whether something's like 5 years ago or 1 year ago. And I usually kind of work it out by like what drugs I was taking at the time. Then I can kind of like work back.
Yeah.
But no, but we said in our famous meeting in the Harvester, we said that we'd start an NGO. I said I'd make some money and you could do the NGO stuff, and then we could combine.
Yeah. I think that must have been about like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to check with Laurie. But then there was a few years where...
I think we can maybe kick him out. Don't know what he's going to bring to the table.
Yeah, not sure. I think he suggested the Harvester, so maybe he can...
True, I mean...
suggest the eating places.
Yeah, I mean, the Harvester, for people who don't know, people who aren't from England, the Harvester is like a cheap pub, which has got a nice salad buffet and cheap pub food. But it's where dreams are made, I believe.
It's a bit of a shithole.
It's a bit of a shithole, but I really like it. And they've got this really nice sauce called Red Devil sauce, which is like, brings me back to my childhood. So,
yeah.
And we like it because it's cheap and it's refillable drinks and refillable salad. And me and Laurie both like to eat a lot. So we went there and we had this
business meeting.
I don't think it was initially going to be a business meeting, but then we just decided that that's what we're going to do. So maybe, watch this space, maybe 5 years' time, you'll have your NGO.
Yeah, maybe.
I think I probably did put a time limit on it. I was probably like, yeah, I'll have the money in a year, and then did not.
Yeah.
But
how's that going?
How's that going? Well, I'm running a business with my friends, so that might do well, hopefully. If that does do well, then we can open an NGO. I wouldn't even know where to start with that, though, to be honest. It's one of those things where there's so many problems. Where do you start? And how do you solve problems without creating more problems? That's a difficult one.
Are you asking me? Was that rhetorical?
Both. it's a rhetorical question that may have an answer.
Yeah, I mean, like, there are a lot of problems that inherently come with starting an NGO, but the purpose is, or at least the purpose for us, was providing people with services that would give them some kind of like dignified existence and something to do while they're waiting for their asylum process to go on. And I think we've really helped a lot of people over the years. I want to say thousands. I think on the balance of things, maybe some problems were caused along the way, but a lot of people have benefited.
Yeah, and I think it's an amazing thing to be able to help. And I think that it's like when you stay small, relatively small, you can operate things like pretty ethically and with a pretty high efficiency for money. And then, like every pound that comes in, maybe 95% of that is like put straight back out into materials and whatever. And you can run with volunteers. But then as you move up the ladder and you try to kind of solve bigger problems, you start having to pay people money. People start then getting... It's easier to be corrupted. You then have to start dealing with governments. Some of those governments are corrupt. You then start having to maybe pay charity money to make a bribe to a corrupt government to allow you to do something. And then it's like everything starts getting all twisted. And it's like, it must be extremely difficult.
Yeah, I mean, if we do start anything, we won't be bribing corrupt governments. I'll say that from the outset. Far from that.
Yeah, but then I don't know, because I always think of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they have like a solution. They have a problem they want to solve, and like one of them was like get rid of malaria, and then another one is provide running water to running fresh clean water to everywhere in Africa. And it's like they go about trying to do that, but to do that, to go along and navigate all those different political systems and effectively be some Western organization that's coming in and trying to to make changes in a country that has countries that have historically had wealth that's been squandered and stolen, which is the same with a lot of countries in the world. It then becomes so difficult. So difficult. And my sister worked doing recruitment for charities before.
Oh yeah?
Like ages ago, like when she was like early 20s. Okay. I think. So she was telling me all about, like the some charities are super, I can't remember the word it is, but like efficient, I suppose, where you give them that money and most of that goes back. But then the bigger ones, like Oxfam or Red Cross and all those type of ones, because they're huge organizations, you have to get CEOs and boards of directors and all these different types of things. And then when you get that, to get good quality people to be leading those, often you have to be paying those people maybe $100,000 a year, because otherwise someone's not going to stop being a CEO of another company and getting $500,000 and then go and get $25,000 to be a CEO. And then it's like all that money starts, the profit margins start absolutely dwindling. Profit margins, like the donation margins start dwindling, and it becomes so difficult to navigate that. And I just think that's what I mean by kind of like causing more problems. But it'd be very difficult. And another thing I suppose is like, and I know you'll experience this, but like just the mix of cultures, and the mix of religions, and then trying to find a way to kind of uniformly allow that to just flourish. Yeah. Because by nature with this type of thing, you have to have rules and regulations and a structure in place. And at the moment, that structure, like you're saying, looks a lot like a prison. But the alternative is, I mean, they're trying to make low-cost accommodation effectively as low cost as possible. And it's like the alternative is that they are intense. And then you have to have these rules and regulations and structures, because it's not at the state where it can just be left to a free market to just everyone to just kind of organize themselves and everything. Because that would be, if it was one culture and one type of people, maybe one tribe, like as you could put it, maybe they could organize themselves. But when it's like so many different people putting those in like a melting pot and trying to get an answer out, or maybe that is the solution. Maybe the free market is the solution, you know, like chuck everyone in and kind of like try and make them organize themselves or whatever. I don't know. Like, could that work? Because it's like, the reason I'm saying this is because like where I live, Raval here, it's, I don't want to like misquote this, but it's the guy that's from here. It's like the most multicultural part of, I want to say Spain.
Yeah.
But or maybe it's of Catalonia or something like that. But there's like a ton of nationalities all melted in a relatively small little neighborhood. I think you remember saying something like 90 something nationalities all in the same little neighborhood. So you have like all sorts of Asian, you have all sorts of African, North African, all sorts of European here.
And people get on.
And there's like, yeah, people get on, but that's not by design. That's by free market. Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is where the lower cost housing is. Or originally it was like, these were like kind of ghettos where originally it was where the sailors would come, and there was like loads of prostitutes and loads of bars, and it's like relatively close to the port. So the people would come off the ships, the sailors would come off the ships, go to the bars, find some sex workers, and then have their way, and then that was it. But that was like this neighborhood. Then this neighborhood just formed from that, and then because of that, you ended up getting loads of migrants that come here, and then the neighborhood formed into this free market. And to be honest, considering that there are like all these different nationalities and there's a lot of poverty and depravity, like relative to compared to everywhere else, here, considering it's in the city centre, it's like there is relative peace. Yeah, there's like a fair amount of pickpocketing, a few muggings, but violent crime is relatively low. And when there is violent crime, it tends to be, and I've seen quite a few videos of this, which are pretty crazy, like in the middle of the day on just like streets where people are walking past, there'll be like machete attacks.
Yeah. Okay.
But that will be a North African gang versus a North African gang, probably over drugs or like sex workers that they're like controlling, and like probably it's some sort of like money or blood feud, which is like, I was speaking to someone recently, like, you know, if that's happening, okay, these people hack at each other with a machete, but they're not hacking at anyone else. So it's kind of like, it's not good, but it's like, in terms of keeping the peace, I think that Barcelona does a pretty good job of keeping the peace. And there are loads of police that patrol the streets.
Does that make you feel safer that police are patrolling the streets?
Yeah, definitely.
Does it?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Because like, there's police cars going up and down all the time. And the police here are quite brutal compared to the UK. I
mean, I know what the Greek police are like, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. I think that, like, I've never seen police brutality in the UK. I've not witnessed it anyway.
Not personally.
I've heard of it happening, and I'm sure it happens like all the time, but I've not personally seen it. Whereas like here, I've seen a policeman knock someone out, just like clothesline this guy and knock him out, and then not put him in the recovery position because he doesn't want to touch him then.
So why does that make you feel safer? Because that makes me frightened of the police, because... No,
but like, for example, if something goes like, they're so over the top, and because it's like ex-dictatorship here, there's like, was kind of like more of like a police state. Like, if there is some sort of this like scuffle on the street or whatever, the police, about 20 police will be there in about 2 minutes, you know? Yeah, because they're so close. There's where I live, there's like 3 or 4 police stations within about 5-minute walk, because it is the epicenter of the city. It's bang in the center of the city, and it was more of a ghetto than it is now. So they'll be there, and they're like, riot vans will come and they'll like block off the street like that. Even like, it's ridiculous. Sometimes I saw it happen before with like a guy that was just he was drunk and he was shouting at someone in a bar or whatever. And like, it's ridiculous. Like, there'll literally be like 10-15 police will arrive so quickly, and they'll like block off the street, and then they'll just kind of like manhandle and search the person or whatever. And that makes me feel more safe because it means that there's no violence, virtually no violence.
Okay, so someone's shouting in a bar and then the load of police come in and start manhandling them and searching them.
Yeah.
You think that's okay?
I don't think it's okay. I'm not saying it's okay, but I'm saying it makes me feel more safe because I'm not shouting at people in bars, so that's not going to happen
But
to me.
what if there was a moment that you were shouting in a bar? I mean, I know you don't drink anymore, so. But
well, I think that I know now that if I cause any problems, I will get manhandled by the police. So I don't. Not that I would anyway, but it's like if you're aware of that, it's the same with bouncers here. In England, as a bouncer, you have to be really careful how you operate because you can be sued so easily and taken to court and all those things, and you'll it seems like you're always on the side of the victim in the UK, whereas here it seems to be the reverse. And it's the same with except for in cases of taking companies to court, the victim seems to win all the time. If they get fired wrongly or anything like that, there's very strong worker protection here. But bouncers are sort of free to do what they want. But because of that, you see almost no violence. So it's it's not right that the bouncers can kind of whack people if they want to. Or I saw one of them before, these two guys having a fight on the beach. And so they were just going at it in front of one of the clubs, and one of the bouncers ran over to him. And the guy, in the heat of the moment, just kind of turned around and pushed the bouncer, not realizing who it was. And the bouncer took out a bat and just smashed him on the kneecap.
Oh my God.
And he just fell to the floor, which is obviously a really extreme, over the top reaction. And that's not okay to be whacking someone and potentially shattering someone's kneecap just because they're fighting with someone else. That's not acceptable. But the result of that is that you just don't really see violence as much as you would anywhere else. You don't see violence outside bars. You don't see violence, rarely see violence on the street. I'm generally never concerned about someone being violent towards me, whereas in the UK I am all the time. But that's also that's also partly a mentality here. From what I see, people tend to shout at each other, really mouthy, but they'll shout at each other and they will keep shouting at each other and be sometimes from my balcony on that street, there's a lot of crazy people that walk up and down, and they'll be shouting at each other sometimes, and they'll be right in each other's faces shouting, but there won't be any altercation. Whereas at home, if someone comes and starts shouting in your face, someone's going to get punched really quickly. And I think that's a big difference. People are quicker to use violence in the UK, I would say, than they are here, from what I've seen. But yeah, I think it's a difficult line to have. The police, how much power should they have?
Do they carry guns? Because in the UK, police don't generally carry guns.
There's a few different types of police here. I think most of them have guns, handguns, I think. But I don't see them pulling guns. I've never seen anyone pull a gun. No. And I've seen the police searching people constantly. It happens all the time.
Who are they searching?
Generally Moroccans.
Yeah.
And that's also quite a difficult line to cross, because the drug gangs, there's a lot of drug gangs, and they are Moroccan. A lot of them are Moroccan run, and there are also a lot of ones that are Pakistani run. And so there are certain people that you see round and about all the time, in the neighborhood when you're here, you see the same people hanging around and you see the same people being searched.
Yeah.
And it's when they get searched here in Spain, if you, for example, if you steal something and it's worth less than, I think it's £400 or £500, it's not considered a crime that's good enough to go to court.
Okay.
So they get searched, the stuff gets taken off them. They might go to court, but then they'll just come back out on bail and they don't care. So they'll just be wandering around. So I know a guy's a policeman. He said like they arrest the same people constantly because they have to arrest them because they're doing something wrong, but nothing will ever happen to them. So it's like they literally arrest the same people like 50 times.
Seems like an inefficient use
It's
of their
inefficient
resources.
use of their resources. And so it's like, it's one of those things as well where it's like, there are Moroccan gangs. Like, it's not just Moroccans that steal stuff here, like the pickpockets. Like there are plenty of different types of people, but there are Moroccan gangs of young Moroccans that go around mugging people and pickpocketing people.
Yeah.
So then it's like, if you also happen to be a young Moroccan, the chances of you getting searched are probably way higher because unfortunately you fall in, even if you're not someone committing a crime, like you are unfortunately much more likely to be searched because your peers are in gangs that are doing the same thing. And how's the police supposed to know that it's you and not them? It's them and not you. So it's like, again, it's one of those things where it's like, it's like a double-edged sword. And sometimes I feel like, you know, there are obviously police who do terrible things, abuse their power, totally corrupt and all these things. But then there are plenty of people who are just trying to do a good job, but can't really do anything about the problems that are there. And like, even when they go and they bust, sometimes you'll see them doing like drug busts, and there's a Vice documentary, they're called narco pisos, which are like narcotics, piso flat, like drug flats. And there's a Vice documentary about Barcelona where they go and just bust all these flats, and they just turn the flats into crack dens basically. But then you go bust one flat and then another one will just open up next door. And like, you know, you bust one gang leader and find them with like, every so often you see it happening on the street, like them just like busting down doors and like all these riot vans going in.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll recover like, I don't know, like 2 kilos of coke or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's like, what about all the other like 100 kilos or something that's probably just like on the same street dotted around? So it's like, I don't know, I always feel not sorry for them, but it's like, it must be a really irritating job where a lot of what you do is making absolutely no difference to anything.
Yeah.
It's because, I don't know, it's like, I don't know, it's like you're basically trying to prohibit people from doing things and keep people safe at the same time.
Yeah.
But you're also, people are hating you and being violent towards you, and you have to protect yourself, because what if those people have got knives or something, and what if those people that you're trying to stop and prohibit from doing something, they decide to get violent towards you? And I always feel especially sorry for the police in America. And yeah, they abuse their powers, and there's loads of examples of them shooting people when they shouldn't and all this. But imagine going to a crime scene with some people who are causing trouble and knowing that they've all probably got guns. And like, you know, like the stress that would put you under going somewhere and not knowing if you're going to tap on someone's window and be like, excuse me, can I see your driving license? And they're just going to pull a gun and blast you in the face. Like, I don't know, it's crazy. And that's why, again, of course, it's not like, I don't know, I'll probably get people hate and be like, oh, you love the police. And I'm like, I don't. I'm just saying, like, people hate on them, but I wouldn't fancy doing their job myself. No, thank you.
No, I would never be a police officer.
It'd be horrible.
But I don't share your sympathy for the police in the US, I'm afraid. Have you ever been stopped and searched here?
I've been stopped whilst in a car. So not really stopped. I've stopped myself. And then...
Because you look a bit dodgy.
No, because I was driving a souped up car that made me look dodgy.
What? Wait, in the UK?
In the UK, yeah.
Yeah.
I've not been stopped
Not
here.
here.
No, I have, sorry. I have been stopped once. I got fined for, I mean, I was hammered, but I got fined for drinking on the street on a day of this festival. It's the biggest festival in Barcelona, where the whole street everywhere is filled with people drinking on the street for like days. It's called La Merced, and it's like this like big festival thing.
Yeah.
And I got fined for drinking on the street at an outdoor festival where everyone was drinking. And I was being so polite to the people, but like in fairness, the guy was like, because we were like Larry English people, whatever. And then I was the only one that could speak Spanish, so he was speaking to me, but he was kind of, he was like raring for a fight, basically. So that was my experience then. He was like wanting me to kind of
Wanting a reaction.
wanting
kind
a
of thing.
reaction, and I was just like totally calm. I was just like, can you please explain why am I being like searched, and why am I being he's like, oh yeah, and he didn't really mention I was going to be fined, and I just received a fine like I don't know how many weeks later through the door. I was like, what? The only person probably to get fined drinking on the street at an outdoor festival where everyone is drinking on the street. So ridiculous.
Yeah, and you're usually quite lucky with things.
Yeah, I know. And I wasn't even, that's the thing. I wasn't even being like, fortunately, I'm not an aggressive person. So I wasn't even being like aggressive or anything. I was just kind of like
trying to reason,
but being really drunk. So he was probably just like, this guy's a total moron. I need to get my fine quotas up.
Let's talk about your car in the UK.
Let's talk about my car in the UK. I'll try to get a photo of it. So my car in the UK, my first car when I was 17, I wanted a souped up boy racer car.
And that is what you got.
That is exactly what I got. I managed to get myself a Vauxhall Corsa. That's Opel Corsa, I think, for anyone that's not in the UK. And it had a body kit on it. It had alloy wheels, four exhausts. Blue lighting when you open up the doors, blue headlights, personalized number plate, tinted windows, spoiler, lowered. It was amazing. And I think I got an absolute bargain. I paid £2,300 for it, and it had £9,000 of modifications on it. And so I think that if you want a cheap car, people, get a modified car, because the moment people start modifying it, it lowers the value of the car. So you can get yourself a lovely boy racer car, and then you can just be driving around and just be cool. You know, it's what everybody wants. But I got stopped in that car a fair few times.
It doesn't surprise me.
But in fairness, all of my encounters with the police then were very pleasant. And I actually got away with a lot of things I shouldn't have got away with. But I think it's probably due to utter confusion from the police, because they see this like boy racer car expecting to open the window and some gangster to be there and just be rude to them. Obviously they see a gangster, me. But then I just talk and like always try and like crack a few jokes and be friendly, and then they've always just been really nice to me and just let me away with anything wrong I was doing, which I won't go into. So yeah, it's just, they've always been very pleasant to me. So I suppose maybe that taints my view. Maybe if I was a minority or something like that. But then we also live in like quite a nice little town where not that much bad stuff really happens. Now it doesn't even have a police station.
No, they got rid of it.
They got rid of the police station because
there's now no one policing the streets of Marlow.
Yeah, so if you do want to commit a crime, you probably got at least like 12 minutes, I would say, from when you commit the crime to the quickest a police car could get there.
No, you don't get from what, Wickham police station?
Yeah, if you bombed it, if you're in a police car and everyone has to get out of your way, you could bomb it in 12 minutes.
Maybe in your old Corsa.
Yeah, maybe my old Corsa. I think though that like the idea is with police and ambulances and stuff that they have a reaction time where areas are supposed to be able to be reached by someone within a certain amount of time. And I want to say that I can't remember if it's 8 or 12 minutes. 8 minutes seems too quick. But then again, if you're going 60 miles an hour...
I guess if you came down the bypass, but then you'd have to go across the bridge, and they've narrowed those bollard things. So
yeah, if you're going 60 miles an hour though, and you go, then that's a mile a minute. So you could get pretty far in 8 minutes if you absolutely bomb it and everyone's like getting out of your way.
Yeah, but you're not going at 60 miles an hour, like up, what's it called, Marlow Hill and down the other side.
It might be. Average of 60 miles an hour. If you can bomb it in the car and everyone gets out of your way.
I feel like this is a really boring topic. I don't agree with you, but fine.
How quickly can
it? At least 15 minutes.
How quickly can a vehicle arrive? Response time. So I think that we have covered a lot of pretty nice topics today. There's becoming a bit of noise outside, so I think maybe we should wrap it up for now. Before we leave, what are your words of wisdom? I know you're a bit nervous about giving these because you have to delve deep into that fountain of wisdom for yourself. Words of wisdom.
Yeah, it's a bit tricky because I don't feel I'm that wise. I think if there's anything I've learnt to do in like the last 6 months, it's to be a lot more present and not think or worry too much about the future. And I think of like my early 20-year-old self was just constantly doing and just running on adrenaline and blah blah blah, and not really spending much time reflecting on things and also like reflecting on achievements in life and stuff that's gone really well, and friendships, relationships, etc. So I think it's just to kind of slow down a bit. Like 20s flew by. I don't know if it did for you as well. But it feels, like the first time going to Samos, 22, that doesn't feel like almost 9 years ago. And 9 years ago?
No.
My maths, okay. Need to work on my maths as well. How many is that? 7 years ago?
Yeah, 7.
7. So I think it would be to be more present, to reflect, to journal. That's been good.
Mm-hmm.
Journaling, don't know if you do that.
I do. Shamefully not enough, but I do.
No, yeah.
I try to do it. I do it every full moon and every new moon. That's what I do.
Okay.
So once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is not enough, but it's okay for now.
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay.
Wisdom.
Yeah, I think it's like so important to focus on the positives as well as the negatives and give credit where credit's due. Like I was speaking about this with Emma earlier with a lady that we've invited on. She hates talking about herself and is always not self-deprecating, but just like thinks that her achievements are not achievements. And it's like it's very strange because, you know, it's sometimes difficult to think of yourself in a positive light.
Yeah.
But we should be able to objectively think of what we've done. You know, like objectively, you have done a law degree. Not many people can do that. You've done a law master's. Not many people can do that. You've like gone to Samos and volunteered there. Not many people do that. So objectively, what you've done is different, at least, and difficult. So it's like objectively, that's good. And it's the same with a lot of people. But it's like focusing on the positives. Because it's so easy to be like, well, I've failed at this, haven't done that, I'm not that good at this. But it's like, really, like there's loads of stuff that we're good at and loads of stuff that we've done well. And I think it's so important to think these things through.
Yeah, focus on the positives. And
Credit where credit's due.
Say yes to things. See your friends. Yeah.
Do podcasts. And finally, say someone listening to this has been like, a penny's dropped in their head and they're like, oh my God, there's all these refugees out there. I need to go help. What do they do?
Like there's a lot of stuff you can do in the UK. I'm not so familiar with the organisations in the UK because I'm not really based in the UK anymore. But in Greece, there's loads of places that need volunteers in all different areas, whether it be teaching English, providing, safe spaces for people, working in places that provide food for people, legal support. If you want to physically go and volunteer, there's loads of stuff online. There's also Samos Volunteers. Great.
So Samos is SAMOS volunteers.com?
.org. Yeah, but I think
right.
.org.
Right. Okay. You should probably know that, but we will we'll link this anyway, and I'll probably put it in the beginning intro.
But or if you don't have the time to go and volunteer, you can also send money to organisations, especially with grassroots organisations.
What are grassroots?
Grassroots are sort of small organisations that are like kind of run, like we don't have any funding or anything from the government or outside influences. We don't have big sponsors, big donors. So it's kind of small scale, small impact stuff. But that 99% of the money, well, basically all of it, is going on the services that are being provided to people. In the last couple of years, we now have stipends, so a small amount of money to support the field coordinators every month, so just to cover their accommodation and food and stuff, which is kind of essential when you need people to stay longer term. But all of the rest of the money goes on providing support to the people that need it most.
Okay. Amazing. And can people contact you if they've got any questions?
No.
No.
Of course.
How do they find you?
What did I give out? My number? I don't know.
I don't know, Instagram or Facebook?
Okay, I mean, I don't really use Facebook. You can find me on Instagram at Jasmine Doust. So Jasmine with an E on the end. Doust.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can email me, actually, jasmine@samosvolunteers.org.
Okay, amazing. So hopefully we will have converted some people into Samos Volunteers with this chat.
I hope so.
And bit by bit, we can make the world a better place. Jasmine, I have one thing. I have a present for you.
Ooh. I hear rustling.
Oh no, it's not broccoli.
I mean, I am vegan, so getting broccoli as a present happens quite often.
It is, dun dun dun, a Quest for Wisdom t-shirt.
Ah, that's nice. Ooh.
It's very exciting.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks very
Right,
much.
give me a hug. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. Farewell. You gotta say goodbye.
Oh, bye.
Thank you for listening to the Quest for Wisdom podcast with your host, Connor Monaghan. If you enjoyed the episode and would like to support the show, then please like it, subscribe, and leave a review on whichever platform you are using. This small act is a massive help and is hugely appreciated. You can find more information about all of our guests on thequestforwisdom.com and follow us at The Quest for Wisdom on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for exciting updates. We also have a Patreon account for anyone who would like to contribute towards the running of the show. Finally, I would like to thank the Comedy Clubhouse in Barcelona for allowing us to record here and for their ongoing support. If you are ever in Barcelona, make sure to check it out for daily shows of comedy and performance art in English. Farewell for now.